There are many great keys to being a great route runner in football, but today we're going to be focusing on the most important ones that every single wide receiver needs to think about. So, first and foremost, on every route, whether you are facing press coverage or whether you're facing zone coverage when the DB's 7 to 8 yards off, our mindset as a wide receiver needs to be, I am selling vertical. I am selling the 9. I am selling the fade. What does that exactly mean? That means that after this release, this DB should be thinking that we are running deep by 3 specific things that I'm doing as a wide receiver. Number one, that is going to be your pad level frequency. So what does pad level frequency mean? So you see at the start of this break point where we're just at like 1 yards into the route, and this route's like 15, 16 yards downfield. I want you to pay attention to his hips, his shoulders, and how he has this forward lean with his body. Whenever a DB is in man-to-man coverage, his eyes are supposed to be watching what? They're supposed to be watching my hips as a wide receiver. So I got to make sure that my hip level, my shoulder level, aka my pad level, stays the exact same from point A, which is the get off the release, all the way till point B, which is the break point. Because if you change up that pad level, if you raise up, you start to run tall, not only will that make you slower, but that gives away your break to the DB. We want to make him think that we're running deep, and nobody will raise their chest up mid-route when they are ultimately running a fade. So pad level frequency or body level frequency, aka staying the same from point A to point B, is the first key that you need to understand to run great routes. Number two, that is going to be your stride length. So DBs not only will pay attention to your body language, your hips, your pad level, as I say, but they will also pay attention to your speed. So many receivers, because they are not comfortable at the break point with their cuts, they will start to shorten their steps right before they break. Like they go from running these real long, like kind of track runner strides to these really choppy, almost like they're doing foot fire type steps. And that change in stride will slow you down, and that lets that DB know, expect that a break is coming. We want to be able to have the same stride frequency and the same pad level frequency all the way into the break point. Now, the reason why guys will raise up, the reason why guys will chop their strides is because, again, they're not comfortable at this break point. They're not comfortable dropping their hips into a route like this, like a comeback or like a curl or like a dig. Whenever you got to drop low, they're not comfortable cutting off of 1 foot and running a post or a corner, whatever the route may call for. And we're going to talk about how you can get more comfortable with that in a second, but you need to understand these principles first. And then last but not least, your speed frequency. So a lot of guys, what they will do, because again, they're not comfortable at the top of the break, is they will come off the ball, they'll run super hard. And this is the most important one. But right before the break point, they start to slow their speed down. Maybe their arms stop. Again, maybe their stride shorten, and that lets that DB know because he's reading my speed and he is reading my upper body. So those 3 frequencies, guys, have to stay the same. Now, like we said, how do you get comfortable at the top of the break? Because us running full speed into a break, full stride, good body language, much easier said than done. How are we able to change direction like that? And that's what we're going to get into next. But before we get into that, fellas, if you're a wide receiver and you guys would like a daily workout schedule that you can follow, check out that very first link in the description below for our elite wide receiver training package. What you'll get access to is 8 weeks of daily wide receiver gym workouts and field workouts that you could do. We map it out into a schedule, like Monday you're doing this, Tuesday you're doing this, Wednesday, etc. We give you the exact sets and reps to do for each on-field drill for your route running, your press releases, your catching, and we give you the exact sets and reps to do for each gym exercise that you will be performing as well. We give examples of each drill and exercise so you know what to do, but this is a complete all-access plan in the gym and on the field for receivers. So guys, check out that very first link in the description below if you're interested in something like that. Let's get back to this video. So now let's focus on a break where we have to drop our hips, right? So where do I have to drop my hips? What type of routes is where I get to the top of the break? And by drop your hips, I mean dropping into a break like so. Sinking your hips, having a violent drop of your hips. Some of you have heard me say that if you're familiar with these videos. What routes do I have to actually do this on? That would be on a 5-yard hitch, and then maybe like a 15-yard comeback, maybe like a 12 back to 10-yard curl, sometimes on a 10 to 12-yard in route or dig route. You have to drop those hips. So again, this doesn't just apply to a comeback. This applies to any route where you got to drop. So when we're going into a break, as we know, the 3 key factors that are going to sell the 9, that are going to sell the fade to get this DB to open up his hips, think we're running deep, so when we put the brakes on, we can get separation. The name of the game is separation when it comes to running routes. So we got to have good pad level frequency, we got to have good stride frequency, and we got to have good speed frequency. Now, when I have all of that, how you're able to stop yourself at the top of the break, having all of that, number one, your change of direction has to be aggressive. A lot of receivers going into this break, they'll be running very, very hard. They'll be pumping their arms. They're going fast. But when they get into the break, they don't drop their hips and snap down like this receiver does. What they do is they sink their hips, or they have something called beat the drum. Beat the drum is something a lot of old school receivers receiver coaches would say, where you take your hands and it's like you're playing the drums and you just move your hands really fast and chop your feet. Guys, the problem with that is that you're going to take either a million steps at the break if you're running hard, because you're just running too hard. Your center of gravity is too tall. And then if your hips are slow, that's slow. The slower your hips drop, the slower the break's going to be. And as soon as that DB sees your hips drop, he's got more time to react on this thing. So guys, we have to be violent. You got to think like you were trying to take your chin and slam it to your knee as quickly as possible. And you were sitting your butt down. I think of it like musical chairs. When you're running a route, think of it like the music stops. And in musical chairs, when the music stops, what do? You find a place to sit down as quickly as you can. So we were thinking chin to knee, musical chairs. That's how fast we were able to ultimately decelerate while running full speed. If you guys can master that, you'll be able to change direction while selling vertical. And that gives the DB so much less time to be able to react and to be able to drive on your cuts, at least where you have to drop your hips. So you getting more comfortable with that by doing drills for that, drills that emphasize a violent hip drop, drills that emphasize single leg strength, ankle stability to allow you to cut going at that type of a speed is what will help you master these skills, you guys. So that's the most important principles, I would say, of running routes: selling vertical, then being able to change direction on a dime. Now, that's not all running routes is about. Running routes is also about being able to beat press coverage, different scenarios, different coverages. How do you go against those? Now, the most pivotal advice I can give you, and we're going to showcase this here in this example from Stephon Diggs. Whenever you are facing press coverage, do not be afraid to step outside of the DB's frame. So I think of press releases like you're on a highway and you have 3 lanes. Let's say the DB's in the middle lane the DB's in the middle lane right here. You got the left lane, you got the middle lane, and then you got the far right lane. If I'm trying to get this DB to jump inside so I could take an outside release like so, I got to make sure that I actually step all the way to that right lane, aka stepping outside of his frame. So let's watch this example from Stephon Diggs. See, this is a great example of a move called a crossover release. It looks a lot like a basketball move that you would do, right? So in basketball, and it almost looks like Diggs is dribbling a basketball while he's doing this, right? Now, I want you to pay attention to it. A crossover is where you step in the direction you want to go first. So we want to go to the outside, so we're stepping to the outside first. So he takes this step with his outside foot off of this foot, guys. He pushes to the inside, and you see how he steps, but look at how far this step is. This step is completely open. His hips, his shoulders, his head, everything makes this look like he is going to the inside or attacking that far right lane, and that's what ultimately gets that DB to jump, you guys. If we were to just do this move, and let's say he does this crossover, but those steps didn't go anywhere. Let's say he just stepped inside of this DB's shoulder frame. He's going to stay patient. He's going to have his eyes keyed on his hips, and as soon as we try to run to the outside, he's going to get hands and squeeze us to the outside. So we have to make sure that we threaten him by stepping outside of his frame. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, coach, if I step this far outside of a DB's frame, isn't my foot going to be really wide? I'm not going to have any explosion. I'm going to be off balance. Guys, you almost want to think of it like your hip and your shoulder is attached to your foot. Not only you bringing your hip and your shoulder with your cuts will sell it more, because that's what the DB's watching. It'll keep you to cut inside of your frame, but outside of the DB's frame. So we go here. It's 1, 2, throws back to the inside. And when you can bring that will help you step further, but also be in a more balanced position to get separation. So guys, against press coverage, one of the most pivotal things you could learn: threaten outside the DB's frame. Guys, there's a million releases you could use. This crossover release is just one of them. Let's say Diggs wanted to run to the inside. He could just throw a jab step with this foot, step more outside the DB's frame, get him to jump, and then go to the inside. You guys, there's a million releases you can use. And you guys, I know this. You see a ton of releases on social media, on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is. And there are a million releases you can learn. But the concept of stepping outside the frame is what you ultimately want to emphasize. So now we're going to look at this next example here from DK Metcalf. And this is something that I think a lot of receivers don't understand when it comes to running routes, and that's taking what the DB gives you. Let's talk about just some general routes for a second, right? So I divide all my routes up into 2 specific categories: outside breaking routes and inside breaking routes. And the way I think about running routes is solely based on outside breaking, inside breaking, outside breaking, inside breaking, versus different press coverage looks that we will see, off-man coverage looks that we will see. That determines how you run the route. It's fairly similar. So inside breaking routes are like in routes, post routes, curl routes, slant routes. Slant routes a little bit different. Let's just focus on these 3: curl, dig, post. If I have an inside breaking route and I'm facing press, that doesn't mean I always have to release to the inside. You got to understand the way we release, whether it's outside, whether it's inside, is not based on the route that we have. Sometimes there is something called an MOR. For those of you that are high school receivers, even younger receivers, know that an MOR is a mandatory outside release. That's what that's there, mandatory outside release. So that means that you have to go to the outside no matter what the DB shows. And that's for certain plays where you're running like a vertical route and the slot receiver's running a 5-yard out or a 10-yard out. And our goal is to turn this DB towards the sideline so he can't see the 5-yard out and ultimately play both of you. So that's why it's a mandatory outside release. But if it's not that, it's not clarified, take what the DB gives you. So this DB's inside shade press. Metcalf has to run a dig. Here's the thing about real routes in real football. Metcalf has got to run this dig. There's a slot receiver that we can't see, probably either running a post, probably running a dig, probably running a curl, or maybe he's running an out route. So if Metcalf's route stem does not look like this, straight up and then straight out, his route stem looks like this, way inside, then up, then here. That's not good, guys. That's terrible spacing. If we have my slot receiver running a dig, you'd be right on top of him, and one defender could guard both of you. So we have to take what he gives me. He's not giving me the inside. A DB's leverage, aka where he's shaded to, aka where he's lined up. If he's lined up shaded to the inside, quarterback's over here, that means he's taught don't give up the inside, force everything to the outside. So if we try to force an inside release, he's going to get hands, which can screw up timing, and he's going to reroute me way inside. So we want to take what he gives me with an outside release. So what Metcalf does off the ball is he attacks this DB's leverage, makes him think we're going to the inside, and you see how much that gets him to move because he doesn't have help to the inside, you guys. When a DB lines up inside shade press, that's because he doesn't have any help over here. He does not want Metcalf to cross his face and go run a drag because he doesn't have any help. His help is the sideline. If we run out of bounds, good, that's what he wants us, so he's giving us the outside release. Now, to get this DB to move, to be able to get separation, we got to attack his leverage. So you see how Metcalf comes off the ball, and this release is called a dive release. It's essentially like where you just dive to the inside and make him think that you're running a drag in a sense. And that's what gets this guy to move. And that's what gets him to move off the platform because he's taught, don't get beat to the inside. He will get his ass chewed out by his coach if he gives up the inside when he's inside shade press. So that moves him. Now he takes this outside release, and guess what? He's able to work to stack, gives a move at the top, and now he's got all of this spacing. He's not right on top of the slot. He's not way across the field on his route, and he's open. You guys, that's the name of the game. Take what the DB gives you and keep things simple. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, what if I do this, but this DB's right on my hip, you guys? There are many ways to break on a route. You could stack him and give him a hard fake outside. He's right on your hip. You could take this inside hand and put it on the back of the DB's shoulder, back of his hip, and slip under him. They call that a throw-by move, but it's about spacing, and it is about timing when it comes down to running routes. So, guys, if you understand one thing about press coverage, take what he gives you. The DB's leverage pre-snap will tell you what he's giving you.